Why did separatists in southern Yemen seize a remote island in the Arabian Sea? Fighters backed by the United Arab Emirates are accused of carrying out a coup on Socotra. So what makes the island so valuable to Yemen's warring sides? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Imran Khan. The latest flashpoint in Yemen's 5-year civil war is a remote island in the Arabian Sea. Socotra is sometimes compared to the famous Galapagos Islands in the Pacific. The plants and animals on the World Heritage Site are found nowhere else on Earth. Now they're in a war zone. The Southern Transitional Council have deposed the island's governor and declared self-rule. The southern Yemen fighters are backed by the United Arab Emirates. Yemen's internationally recognized government, supported by Saudi Arabia, calls the takeover a coup. Hashim Al-Habera explains how the latest events further complicate efforts to end the war.
Celebrating their new military gain, forces loyal to the self-styled Southern Transitional Council, or STC, took full control of Socotra. The archipelago is located in the Arabian Sea, overlooking vital oil and gas shipping routes through the Gulf of Aden, Bab el-Mandeb and the Red Sea. This is a major victory for the UAE-backed separatists who took over the city of Aden 2 years ago and further expanded their influence by announcing self-rule in the south in April. By seizing Socotra, the STC moves closer towards achieving their goal, breaking away from the north and reinstating the Republic of South Yemen that existed until 1990, when it was united with the north. The internationally recognized government of President Abdrabbu Mansour Hadi condemned the action by the STC as a coup. Based in Saudi Arabia, Hadi and his allies feel betrayed by their hosts in Riyadh.
What happened in Socotra is an occupation by the Saudis and the Emiratis. I call on the government to resign and seek another honest partner.
5 years ago, Saudi Arabia and the UAE launched a major military campaign in Yemen. Their stated goal was to defeat the Houthis, a Shia rebel group that seized the capital Sana'a in 2014. The Saudis and the Emiratis accuse Iran of using the Houthis to destabilize the region, but the campaign soon turned into a humanitarian disaster. Thousands of civilians were killed, millions faced food shortages. The UN considers Yemen the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. Now that the separatists have captured Socotra, they are likely to turn their attention to the provinces of Shabwa, Hadramaut and Al-Mahra, the last areas in the south under the control of Hadi's loyalists. The latest developments are likely to undermine the UN's efforts to end the war in Yemen and start political talks between warring factions. The country now is more divided than ever, raising fears among its people of a prolonged conflict, more casualties and more suffering. Hashim Al-Barra, Al Jazeera.
Let's bring in our guests. In London, Raiman Al-Hamdani, Research Fellow on Yemen at the European Council for Foreign Relations. In Washington, D.C. in the United States, Nabil Khouri, Senior Researcher at the Atlantic Council for Studies. He's also a former US Deputy Chief of Mission in Yemen. And also in London, Elisabeth Kendall, Senior Research Fellow in Arabic and Islamic Studies at the University of Oxford. A warm welcome to you all. I want to start in London with Raiman Al-Hamdani. Not only by any terms of international law is this effectively a coup, but it's an occupation. Who's behind this and why did it happen now?
It's a very good question, and it's very difficult to also call it an annexation or a coup because the acts have been committed on the ground by a proxy. So the Southern Transitional Council, which is a UAE-backed group or an armed group or a non-state actor, whichever you'd like to call them, has basically announced their takeover of the island of Socotra. And this has been done almost not violently, but through an agreement that the governor of Socotra would leave the island and with the auspices of Saudi Arabia to try to sort of negotiate a deal between the United Arab Emirates-backed group and the internationally recognized government of Yemen, which is represented by the governor. I believe this has taken place because of the harsh battles that have been going on between the international recognized government and the STC in southern Yemen, particularly in the governorates of Arabian and Shabwa. As we see it, there have been really heavy battles for the past months, and tensions have been going on for a long time. And so it may seem that the takeover of Socotra might be a small victory, or it's sort of a distraction from the main battles that are going around. It may be perhaps to raise the morale of separatists in the south, or it just might be a provocative move.
Let's bring in Washington, D.C. here, and Nabil Khouri. Nabil, you've had extensive experience in Yemen. What does it mean? Is it, like our guest in London says, this is a moral victory for the separatists, or is it much more strategic than that?
Well, it's certainly a propaganda victory and a sign that the STC is already touting not only of their expansion in the south, but they are advertising popular support for their takeover of Socotra. Strategically, this doesn't add anything to their strength. The island is somewhat off the main areas where battles are going. It is of strategic value only to the United Arab Emirates, which has been on a course for the past few years of extending its influence to seaports all the way from Dubai to North Africa. So this is clearly of value to them. But as for the STC, anything they win militarily, particularly with UAE support, does not lend itself to long-term stability. They would gain much more by coming to some sort of an agreement with other factions in Yemen.
Well, agreements are very, very far off. Elisabeth, Kendall, let me bring you in here. The unspoken word, it seems to be here, or the unspoken name of the country, is Iran. Clearly, the UAE are very worried about Iranian actions in the region. Does Socotra give them any sort of counterbalance?
Well, I think you're right to bring in Iran. Clearly, the UAE and other Gulf countries are concerned about Iran flexing its muscles in the region, about its inroads into Yemen. But I would see this more as a commercial and strategic agenda on the part of the UAE that has been predictable, really, for the past half a decade. UAE showed its interest in Socotra Island really right from the start of the war. And matters have come to a head on several occasions, perhaps most prominently in May 2018, when Yemeni government forces, supported by Saudi, battled UAE forces. But clearly this has been part of a strategy of the UAE for the Horn of Africa region for a while, and it's simply that this is now being completed via proxies, the Southern Transitional Council, and it was predictable for a long time. What it does is it gives the UAE a strategic outpost right at the mouth of that very important Gulf of Aden, which is the sea route through towards the Red Sea, through which much oil shipping goes, and it fits with its strategy in other countries around the region: Djibouti, Somalia, Eritrea. And of course, Socotra has its own value. It's a very beautiful island. It could be commercially exploitable. So I think we need to see this within a broader framework, not just that of countering Iran.
Raiman, Al-Hamdani, what are your thoughts? Do you think we should be seeing this in a broader framework?
I think perhaps. I mean, there are obviously tensions with Iran, but it's been also shady. The United Arab Emirates and Iran have been engaged in military talks to sort of settle their own tensions previously. They have also acted together with Iran. They also have historical and cultural ties with Iran. It may be perhaps to provoke Iran. I wouldn't really take that off the menu, but But the thing is, as Dr. Elisabeth Kendall had said, is that it is quite distant, and also the investment in Socotra and in the Horn of Africa is probably going to deplete a lot of the money of the United Arab Emirates. So I see it as more also as an attempt by the UAE to sort of stand out in the region. And I don't think the United Arab Emirates will be able to do so near the islands that they have a conflict with with Iran. And so it's a bit difficult because the conflict no longer in Yemen represents or is seen through the eyes of there are an Iranian militia in the south anymore. And so the conflict actually is the conflict of the Yemeni government and the United Arab Emirates directly. And obviously proxy actors are involved. I would say the Iranian question may be more valid if you're answering questions about the conflict in the north.
Well, let's have a look. I mean, it is a very complicated conflict. Nabil Khouri, the UAE has actually changed its position a couple of times during this long conflict in Yemen. Generally, it was fighting on the part of the Saudis. It was, an ally, and then it suddenly took a step back. What's behind this move? Is it to reassert itself?
Well, first of all, on the Iran question, this has absolutely nothing to do with Iran. The Houthis have never threatened Socotra and are in no position to approach it. As for Iran, they cannot, I don't think they even think about Socotra, but if they were to try, it's the US Navy that would stop them. So that's not an excuse. Now, the UAE withdrew its own forces from Yemen, but it has not withdrawn its influence. A lot of the Nukhba militias in the Hadramaut are formed, funded, trained, equipped by the UAE. The STC has considerable support from the UAE. Therefore, this is an extension of influence by proxy. Why now? I think there is an agreement now. There was a while there was a bit of a conflict between Saudi Arabia and the UAE. But I think now there is an agreement between them because the Saudis clearly are not supporting Hadi's forces, not on Socotra, where Saudi withdrew its small force, and not in Evian, where the clashes are going on hot and heavy without any Saudi participation.
Now, it's interesting, Nabil, you mentioned American involvement there. We are running up to an election in November. There are plenty of other conflicts that President Donald Trump should be concerned about, but there's nothing likely to happen for Socotra. It'll almost be forgotten, won't it, given Libya, given Syria, given and myriad other natures of conflicts in the region?
Well, Trump personally, I'm sure, doesn't think about Yemen, let alone Socotra as such. He leaves these foreign policy issues to the Department of Defense and the Secretary of State. As such, U.S. policy has continued as before, which is lending support to Saudi Arabia and the UAE in terms of the siege around Yemen, in terms of logistical support. And in that, there isn't much of a change, and there's no need for the U.S. to do anything concerning what just happened in Socotra.
Raiman Al-Hamdani in London, what can be done then if the US isn't going to do anything? What the international communities has been hamstrung, let's say, for the last 4 years, 5 years, when it comes to Yemen. It's a conflict that is absolutely brutal. What can be done?
I think that's a very difficult question to answer, but I think we can sort of, hypothesize what could be done. I think the United Arab Emirates and the Saudi Arabians very well know that they once entered Yemen, that they could sort of get a carte blanche to do whatever they can because of lessons previously learned during the Cold War of proxy actors. And so it's very difficult at the moment to sort of detach the proxy narrative from perhaps the south of Yemen, and even the north of Yemen, and sort of see that. The thing is, now we have to settle the differences among the foreign backers. There are serious and very clear differences between the Saudi Arabians and the Emiratis. The the conflict between the Saudis and the Emiratis is seeming to simmer down by actions like this. Perhaps the move in Socotra is an attempt by the Saudis to sort of give the Emiratis what they want while they still maintain their priorities in Yemen. I think the most important thing, and I think something that really should just be said out loud, is that in Socotra, it is a World Heritage Place, as Dr. Kendall has mentioned. It has it could be very exploited for the cause of economic rapid development. But the island presents a fragile ecosystem with an indigenous population who have been extremely quickly being exposed to the outside world. And as a matter of fact, even in the past, Socotra has been very detached from the Russian troops, from British troops, from southern Yemeni troops, and from Yemen at the moment. You know, looking at the harsh realities on the ground and the violence that's occurring in Ebian, I would hope that the STC, that the United Arab Emirates and the Saudi Arabians will actually acknowledge Socotra's fragile ecosystem, acknowledge the Socotris' demand for a better life, and as a matter and to avoid bringing sectarianism onto the island. I mean, we have seen the United Arab Emirates representative to Socotra, Khalfan al-Mazroui, in multiple videos going around the island telling Socotris, who I don't think know very much about modern Islam or the Islam that's been practiced in the past 60 years in the Middle East, but going around telling them that the north of Yemen are Zoroastrians, which is a derogatory term to call Shia people. And I think sort of bringing that sectarian tone to an island that is unarmed, an island that is very, very involved in its own environment. I just think if we detach these things and we put attention to it to the world, perhaps the environmental organizations might have something to say.
Well, let's bring in Elisabeth Kendall here. It's a very interesting point that Raiman actually brings up. I've seen some of those videos as well. They are quite shocking. The language is used almost as an insult to people in the north, and it is bringing this idea of a Shia-Sunni conflict to an island like Socotra, which isn't really that religious, certainly not that Islamic. Is that a concern to you?
That's right. Yeah, it is a concern to me. It's part of my broader concern, which is that somehow in all of this, the actual people of Socotra tend to get lost. And we've got these big, heavyweight world powers slogging it out on their little island. What I'm really concerned about is what the Socotrans themselves actually want. Now, of course, the Southern Transitional Council says that they have huge support on Socotra, and indeed they do have some support on Socotra, but so does the Yemeni government. And so, frankly, does the old Sultanate of Mahran Socotra. That too has support. So it would be good to ask the actual people what they want. I noticed that in the truce that was, well, short-lived, but negotiated last Wednesday on Socotra, it was really just between the coalition powers. It was between Saudi Arabia, or the Saudi-led coalition, the security forces, and the Southern Transitional Council forces. And that really tacitly acknowledged that the Southern Transitional Council had some kind of toehold or grip on the island and that its forces could be there. But I would like to see some serious, transparent polling done on Socotra for what the Socotrans themselves want. Now, what I don't think we can believe is the story peddled by both of the main parties in the coalition that they are on Socotra in order to conduct development operations for Yemen. And that was the idea when they negotiated their truce in 2018. Frankly, to launch some kind of development operation from an island which is 380 kilometres off the main coast of Yemen, when most of those areas that now need investment and development are 1,000 kilometres away in the north of Yemen, is not credible.
Nabil Khoury, what do you think? Development, is that just a ruse?
Of course, it's a ruse. Like many other things they sign, including the Riyadh Agreement, it is very opaque. They don't truly express what their real interests are. As Elisabeth said, if their goal was development, they would have done that in Aden, anywhere in the south, anywhere in the areas they control. They haven't done much at all. In fact, you look at the spread of the coronavirus in Yemen, causing a disaster upon a disaster, while the UAE, and it's the European Union that has lately contributed money in areas in Hadramaut and the south, and not the Saudis and the Emiratis. The best thing they can do if they really want development on Socotra, is to leave the island alone. It has a very fragile ecosystem, and they are destroying it with the presence of armored vehicles and troops running right down to the beaches, lovely beaches, which I visited when I was in Yemen. This area is best left alone for ecotourism and not for major development, which they don't intend to do anyway.
Well, Raiman, in London, what are your thoughts? Do you think that this is about development or not about development?
I think it is to a certain degree. I also think that it's. I think I disagree with Mr. Nabil Khouri in the sense that Socotra should be alone. Yes, ecotourism obviously can be a beneficial thing for the island, but there's no reason why Socotra should be held behind while other people in the world are benefiting from the neoliberal world order. I'm sorry, I'm not a supporter of the neoliberal world order, but there are, the Socotrans have been deprived from education, from health facilities, from modernization for decades. And this actually may explain why there's actually sympathy to the United Arab Emirates when they come with lavish amounts of money and a lot of developmental projects. It's very quick to lure people in. I think we also need to consider one thing. There's been also a huge campaign by the United Arab Emirates in Socotra to sort of establish or reconnect a heritage line that's existed between Socotra and the United Arab Emirates. Now, a lot of Yemenis, particularly in mainland Yemen, may disagree with this and see it as something that's completely flawed. However, there are actually very strong links between Socotra and the United Emirates, maybe not written historically, but particularly since the 70s and the 80s. Socotris have been immigrants to the Gulf, particularly the city of Ajman has a lot of Socotri nationals that have gained Emirati nationals, and this sort of money has been coming in since the 70s until now. So there is a cultural connection. So we have to sort of understand these nuances. I think Nabil Khouri is right to say that, yes, the island is fit for ecotourism, but there are serious grievances in the island, particularly that these grievances were not shown to them by the Yemeni government in the past, but rather displayed to them by the United Arab Emirates when they had arrived on the island. And
but
so,
Raiman, let me just ask you, there seems to be a very slight disconnect between both of your arguments. You are talking here about development, and that might be a good thing by the UAE, but earlier you did say that the United Arab Emirates generals were, talking about Zoroastrians. They were insulting people in the north, saying they weren't Muslim enough. Aren't you worried that with development comes that sort of stereotyping, to use one word?
Yes, I think so. I think the disconnect is basically maybe from development and sectarianism. I think the island definitely needs development. I don't think the United Arab Emirates is only there to just lie about development and take over the island. I think there are some serious concerns that the United Emirates may want to be. Maybe we'd agree with them, maybe we don't. That's a different question. But I am absolutely concerned about the way the hearts and minds of Socotrans have been won, and not just by the United Emirates but also by the Yemeni government. The Socotran identity has been exploited by everybody. I think, as I said, what we have to be careful is that these developmental programs, whether it be a guise or whether it be legitimate, it has to be done under the approval of the Yemeni government, which is internationally recognized. And that's basically how things go under the United Nations system.
Elisabeth, Kendall, we are running out of time, but I do just want to ask you, you are an expert in Arabic and Islamic studies at Oxford University. Is there any chance that the UAE might have some good, benign attitudes towards Socotra, or is Socotra Island, or is the UAE simply using it as another tool in their arsenal?
It's far from me to say what is in the UAE's mind. I keep an open mind. I can't see how this will benefit the Socotran people themselves unless it comes with a really transparent, open mechanism for choosing what they want for their future. And this kind of democracy isn't really a UAE forte. And what concerns me now is, will there be knock-on effects in the rest of Yemen? We've already seen, since Saturday's takeover, we've already seen 2 STC rallies in Al-Mahra, in the far east of Yemen. And we've seen protests this morning in Mukalla, in Hadramaut. So it could be that this is part of now a domino effect where they try to topple other areas of the south. This flies in the face of all of the UN's efforts to engage the warring sides in peace consultations.
Well, I want to thank all our guests. We are unfortunately out of time. Raiman, Al-Hamdani, Elisabeth, Kendall and Nabil Khouri. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter. We are at AJ Inside Story. From me, Imran Khan, and the whole team here in Doha, bye for now.